the record, both assistant state attorneys are present. Both defense counsel and Mr. Sievers, state's ready.
Yes, sir, but may we approach?
Sure.
Thank you.
State's ready. Defense is ready.
Yes, Your Honor.
Bring them out. Please be seated. I'll ask our jurors again, did you follow my instructions, not talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved? Even if you did so inadvertently, now would be the time to raise your hand and let me know. For the record, no jurors lifted their hand. Next witness.
State Calls, Lieutenant Lebid, David Lebid.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
David Michael Lebid,
And can you spell your last name for the court reporter, please?
L-E-B as in boy, I-D as in David.
Where are you currently employed, sir?
Lee County Sheriff's Office.
And in what capacity are you employed there?
I'm currently a lieutenant in our homicide unit.
And what was your role back in June of 2015?
At that time, I was a sergeant in the same unit, and I was a supervisor over this case.
And as a supervisor over this case, what were your duties?
To monitor the progress of how everything was progressing from our crime scene to neighborhood canvases to the investigation of different people involved.
And were you the supervisor over the case from its inception?
Yes.
Now, initially, when Dr. Sievers was found on the 29th of June 2015, did you have any suspects at that time?
No.
At some point, was there a break in the case?
Eventually.
And when did that break come?
Our largest break occurred, saying July 9th, same year.
And where did it come from?
We received a phone call from someone up north saying that they knew of a witness that had information that could impact our investigation.
And as a result of that phone call, what did you do?
We went up there to speak with this witness to determine what our next step was.
And were you able to actually make contact and speak with the witness?
Yes, we did.
Who did you speak with?
Her name is Rose Grunert.
And after you spoke with Rose Grunert, did you hop back on a plane and come back to Fort Myers?
No, we did not.
You had to extend your stay a little bit.
Yes, we did.
How long was that initial trip to speak with Miss Grunert? How long did you anticipate staying away from home?
Initially, we anticipated a couple days, but by the time I came home, it was about 13 days later.
So after you spoke with Miss Grunert, where did you go?
We went to Jefferson County, Missouri.
And what was the purpose of going to Jefferson County, Missouri?
We had some people we wanted to speak to and some places to look for evidence.
And who did you want to speak to in Jefferson County?
The first person we wanted to speak with was Curtis Wayne Wright, Jr.
And why did you want to speak with Mr. Wright?
Well, based on information that we learned from Ms. Gruner, he became a person of interest for us.
And when you got to Jefferson County, did you get to speak to Mr. Wright?
Eventually, we did.
And did you get to ask him about the death of Dr. Sievers?
Yes, we did.
And did he admit to any involvement in the death of Dr. Sievers?
No, he denied all involvement.
And after you spoke with Mr. Wright, was there anybody else in Jefferson County that you wanted to speak with?
Yes, there were numerous people.
Let's talk specifically about Jimmy Ray Rogers. Let's talk about your initial contact with, did you have an initial contact with Jimmy Rogers?
Yes, we did.
And how and why did you make initial contact with Mr. Rogers?
Through the process of going through evidence from Mr. Wright, namely his cell phone, as well as cell phone records, we learned that Jimmy Ray Rogers was someone that he spoke with in a close time to the weekend when Dr. Teresa Sievers was murdered. So that became something of interest to us during our timeline.
And first of all, and before we continue with Mr. Rogers, where did you make initial contact with Mr. Wright?
At his residence?
The one on Chapel Hill Court?
Yes.
And did you also get to do a neighborhood canvass in that area?
Yes, we did.
And did anybody know anything about Mr. Wright or about whether or not he'd been to Florida?
No one would speak with us during our neighborhood canvass of that neighborhood.
And then, where did you when you realized that you wanted to talk to Mr. Rogers, did you go to make contact with him?
You said where?
Did you go to make contact with him?
Yes, I did.
And where did you go to make contact with Jimmy Rogers?
We went to his last known residence.
And when you went to his last known residence, did you find him there?
Eventually. He wasn't there when we first arrived, but eventually he showed up.
Was anybody there when you first arrived?
His girlfriend at the time,
And what was his girlfriend's name?
Taylor Showmaker.
And did you get a chance was Miss Showmaker cooperative with you when you arrived at his residence?
She was friendly and spoke to us, but would not provide a sworn statement.
And did Mr. Rogers eventually arrive on scene?
Yes, he did.
And did you have to leave and come back to speak with them, or did he arrive while you were still there initially visiting with Miss Showmaker?
He arrived while we were there.
And I guess, how did he act when he arrived?
Jimmy seemed upset, kind of frantic.
Now, you hadn't had any contact with him before he arrived,
Correct.
so you hadn't told him why you were there.
No.
Was anybody else with you?
Detective Michael Downs at the time.
Was Detective Schooneman from the local sheriff's office there at the time?
When we first made contact there, no.
Just you and Downs?
Yes.
And so Mr. Rogers arrives while you're at his home talking with Miss Showmaker, and you said he was frantic. Was he cooperative?
He spoke with us for a short time, but did not want to provide a statement.
And so what's the difference between speaking with you and providing a statement?
Well, speaking with someone is just like right now when we're having a normal conversation, but when I say provide a sworn statement, I'm asking someone, the things that you're discussing with me right now, would you swear to tell the whole truth and maybe you have to tell that again later on in a court?
And so when you were speaking with Mr. Rogers, that discussion wasn't being memorialized in any way?
Correct.
Do people also provide a written sworn statement as well during an investigation?
Yes, that's another option that we use sometimes.
And so Mr. Rogers was talking with you, but he wouldn't memorialize the discussion.
That's correct.
Did you get a chance to ask Mr. Rogers about Florida?
Briefly, yes.
Was he here?
He said he did not go to Florida.
He didn't mention anything to you about going to a graduation in Florida?
Objection leading.
Sustained.
Did Mr. Rogers, he said he was not in Florida.
Objection leading.
That's a question. That's not-
Overruled.
He said he had not been to Florida?
Correct.
Did he mention anything at all about a brother?
No, he did not.
Did he mention anything at all about a brother in Florida?
No, he did not.
Overruled.
Did you get an opportunity to ask Mr. Rogers whether or not he knew Dr. Sievers or Mark Sievers?
I don't remember asking that.
Okay, so how long did you visit with Mr. Rogers and Ms. Showmaker before actually leaving?
After Mr. Rogers showed up, I'd say 10 to 15 minutes tops before we left. And before he got there, we were with Taylor Showmaker for approximately a little over 20 minutes.
Now, did there come a time when you heard from Miss, well, let me back up. Before you left, did you tell Mr. Rogers and Miss Showmaker how they could contact you if they had anything to tell you?
Yes.
And did there come a time when you heard from Miss Showmaker again?
I did not.
Okay. Now, was there any later discussions between you, Detective Downs, and Ms. Showmaker?
Yes.
When was that?
In August of the same year, 2015, eventually we were doing a warrant service at her residence, and that's when we encountered her again.
And during the warrant service at her residence, did she tell you anything about the case?
Objection hearsay.
Overruled.
I did not speak to her at that time.
Did she speak with anybody?
She spoke with Detective Michael Downs.
During the warrant service at the house, did you threaten Ms. Showmaker in any way
No.
to get her to talk to Downs?
No.
Offer her any money?
No.
Any inducements of any kind?
No.
Now, after she spoke with Detective Downs, did some things happen? Did some other things start happening for you and Downs while you were there in Missouri?
Our investigation continued, yes.
At some point, did your investigation move to Doe Run?
Yes, it did.
Now, we heard earlier that Downs recovered like a blue suit on a roadway that leads to and from Doe Run. Were you present when that blue suit was recovered there?
No.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 21st century investigation. During your investigation, did you employ the services of other members of the sheriff's office in your investigation?
Yes.
And, what are some of the things that sheriff's office, when you do a homicide investigation, what are some other things that you have to research and investigate now, other than just a crime scene?
Based on today's current technology, there are numerous other things that we need to review, to include, most notably, cell phones and cell phone records belonging to the people involved in order to determine the timeline of events, as well as to see who communicates with who and how frequently. On top of that, we also review computers. And to a degree, a lot of our cell phones are computers for us also. And that provides a huge challenge because of the volume of data that we have to go through. So that's why we involve numerous members from our agency to aid in that.
And so in order to conduct that 21st century investigation, do you find yourself gathering phone numbers from witnesses, suspects, and other people involved in your investigation?
Yes,
Let's talk about Jimmy Rogers. Were you able to obtain his phone number?
yes, we were.
And after obtaining his phone number, did you and your team then request records, specifically cell phone carrier records regarding his phone number?
Yes.
What was his phone number?
Area code 573-864-1179.
And did you also, you told us earlier that you had found some information in Mr. Wright's phone regarding Mr. Rogers. So did you know Mr. Wright's phone number?
Yes, we did.
And what was his number?
Area code 314-996-9581.
Objection, Your Honor. Appears as if the witness is reading. I'd ask the court to instruct the witness to testify from memory.
Sir, if you don't recall, you'll need to let the state know. If there's anything that will refresh your memory, you'll have to go through that process.
Yes, sir.
State.
And Mr. Mark Sievers, did you have an opportunity to obtain his phone number?
We did.
Do you have an independent recollection of what his phone number was?
No, I don't.
All right. And did you make some notes for yourself to help you remember what his phone number is?
I did.
Would it help your recollection if you were able to review your notes?
Yes, with your permission.
Your Honor, may the witness review his notes of Mr. Sievers' phone number.
Yes, sir.
And when you're done, you can't read from the notes, but when you've refreshed your recollection, you can tell me.
I'll do my best.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
Area code 314-239-0173.
And also, did you have an opportunity to determine whether or not Mr. Wright was married or had any other people in his household?
Yes,
And did you get a chance to meet his spouse?
I did.
Did you get her phone number as well?
Yes.
Do you have an independent recollection of what her phone number is?
No, I don't.
And did you make a note for yourself so that you could remember what her phone number is?
Yes, I did.
Would it help your recollection if you were able to review the note that you made so you could tell us what her phone number is?
Yes, it would.
Your Honor, may the witness refresh his recollection from his note.
Yes, sir.
All right, when you've refreshed, you can't read from the note, but when you've refreshed, you can tell us what the phone number was.
Area code 314-677-7311.
Okay. Talking a little bit more about Mr. Wright, we heard earlier that there was a white Hyundai that was recovered from Arizona. How did y'all end up in Arizona?
Well, based on the interview I did with Angela Wright on the day of the warrant service at Curtis Wainwright's residence, she explained to me that she was involved in a car crash recently and they rented that vehicle. So during that interview, I asked her where was that location, where was the location of the car rental place? So by going there and learning about it and then getting a subpoena, that's how we identified the exact vehicle that we were looking for. And then we had it entered in as a wanted vehicle nationally. And eventually we were able to trace where that vehicle was located. So then we relied on personnel from our agency to go down there.
And you received certified records from Enterprise. Did you tell me Enterprise? Well, where did you locate the car?
The information we received was from Enterprise Realm.
And did you receive certified records from Enterprise confirming that the vehicle that was rented at the place was actually rented, who it was actually rented to?
Yes, we did.
And is that the subpoena you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
Okay. And all the phone numbers that you gave us, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Wright, Mr. Sievers, Mrs. Wright, did you receive records regarding those from the cell phone carriers regarding all those numbers as well?
Yes, we did.
And when those records arrived, what did you do with them?
Well, we had our analysts that focus on cell phone records process the data to help us sort and recognize the volume of calls to specific phone numbers. So that helped us understand the relationships of different people who was talking more frequently, as well as a timeline of when people speak to each other. And on top of our analysts, different investigators will also look at it with a different eye, a different point of view.
Now, let's talk about Angie Wright. You had personal contact with Miss Wright?
I did.
Did Miss Wright do anything that caused any concerns regarding your investigation?
Her disposition to me appeared to be all over the place, and what I mean by that is she'd answer a question and then we'd move forward, and I couldn't tell if she was just really emotional because of how we met that day or if she was being deceptive. So that's what kind of gave me pause for concern and made me look at her for a longer time frame than I would a normal witness who seemed to be way more forthcoming.
And did you later become involved in the proffer process with Mr. Wright?
Yes, I did.
And were you present during his proffer?
Yes, I was.
What about that he gave a proffer and then he later on gave a sworn statement? Were you present during that one as well?
Yes, I was.
During the proffer, there was a discussion about Mr. Wright. Do you recall about Miss Wright? Do you recall that discussion?
I do.
What was that about?
Through the course of our investigation and learning about all the different people involved in this case, whether geographically or in the cell phone records, Curtis Wainwright's wife was a primary figure because of how often she would normally speak with him. So my recollection of speaking with Mr. Wright was he had concern for his wife and wanted to make it clear to us about how this homicide was perpetrated by him and not his spouse. So that's what I recall with her coming up and him having concern for her, as well as we mentioned about her statements.
Now, were there, during your investigation, had you also had an opportunity to interview other witnesses who had either had contact with Miss Wright or whom she had contact with?
Yes.
Were there some things that she had done with reference to those witnesses?
Yes.
Tell us what.
When we spoke with one of our first main witnesses, Rose Gronert, that was one of the pieces of information that led us towards Jefferson County, Missouri, was Miss Gronert's recollection of a conversation she heard between Angela Wright and her mother, Kathy Moran. Specifically, Angela being upset about something, and then what was interesting is through our investigation, she was upset about her husband being out of town. And then as our investigation progressed, we learned through talking to some of these witnesses that she said that she didn't say that he was out of town. As if my impression of my understanding of what I was listening to from these witnesses was that she complained about Curtis Wainwright being gone and then tried to convince people that she never complained about it, which was suspicious to me, as if someone was covering for someone.
By the time it was time to take Mr. Wright's statement, had you figured out whether or not Angie Wright had been down here and involved in this homicide?
By the time we did a final sworn statement, after a proffer agreement with Curtis Wainwright Jr., there was no evidence that showed me that Angela Wright was down here in Florida.
And even during the proffer agreement, during the proffer statement, first we did the proffer, then we did the sworn statement. During the proffer, had there been any evidence that Miss Wright had come down here and participated in the homicide of Dr. Sievers?
No.
So she, from what you're describing, she talked to some witnesses and told them some things and then tried to walk it back later on?
Yes.
Did you want to arrest her for that, or did you just want her to stop?
I wanted her to stop interfering.
Was any of this, wanting Miss Wright to stop talking to the witnesses, was any of that part of Mr. Wright's proffer agreement?
No.
And then later on, when Mr. Wright gave the sworn statement, was any of this part of the plea agreement?
No.
You were present when we read the plea agreement to him?
Yes, it was.
Was there any side deal between Mr. Wright and the state regarding Angie Wright?
No.
And to this day, is Miss Wright a suspect at all in this homicide?
No.
Did she eventually stop talking to the witnesses?
To my understanding, yes.
Okay, so let's move back to Jimmy Rogers. So, eventually, was Mr. Rogers taken into custody in Missouri?
Yes.
And why was he initially taken into custody?
For a federal violation of probation warrant.
And do you know what the reasons were that his federal probation was violated?
Objection relevance?
Just very,
Just getting to a statement that's made by Mr. Rogers and where.
both sides approach.
Okay, so Mr. Rogers violated his probation. Do you know why?
Because we located him on surveillance video footage in Florida.
And when you found him, what surveillance footage?
Specifically, it was a Walmart in the city of Fort Myers, Florida.
And I'm guessing that that information made its way to his probation officer somehow.
Myself and Detective Downs, we made contact with his probation officer.
So after he was in custody for the violation of probation for being in Florida, did you go to have a discussion with Mr. Rogers about the Sievers case?
Yes, we did.
And do you recall where you went to have the discussion with him?
I believe it was St. Charles, Missouri. It was a federal holding facility there.
And what was the purpose of going to the federal holding facility?
Well, at that time, we just were able to finally obtain a warrant to charge Mr. Rogers with the crimes in Florida, not just something related to his federal probation. So we were there to let him know that and to ask him if he would be willing to provide a sworn statement post Miranda.
And did you get that opportunity to, well, first of all, what was your plan? How did you plan to have this discussion with Mr. Rogers?
Well, based on the facility itself, we had to come into a front waiting area and then take an elevator up to a room. So our plan was when we got in the room to set up chairs appropriately to where we could have close contact with him and then use one of our digital recorders to record the conversation.
And so when you say we, who was we?
Detective Michael Downs and me.
And so did you get to actually have that contact visit with Mr. Rogers?
No, we did not.
Did you get to actually see Mr. Rogers?
Very briefly.
And can you explain to the jury how that happened?
Well, the room that we were escorted into had a table and chairs, and that's where I thought we were going to have this encounter. But On the far wall, when you walk in, there was a clear, it looked like glass or plexiglass window. It's pretty small. And that's where Mr. Rogers appeared in front of, instead of being brought into the room, as that was what our understanding was.
And so when you appeared behind the window, did you get a chance to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself and tell them why you were there?
Kind of, we tried.
And when you say that you tried, that suggested something happened to keep it from happening. What happened?
It did. When I say Mr. Rogers appeared, we were looking at the door and the window's behind us, and all of a sudden, Mr. Rogers is in front of that window and says, "What are you guys doing here?" and started kind of yelling at us. So we tried to say, "Jimmy, you know who we are. We recently met. You know, slow down. Stop yelling. Calm down. Let's talk about this."
And did you get him to calm down?
No.
And when you said, "Calm down, let's talk about this," how did he respond?
He said to us that he demanded to know what his charges were, otherwise he was walking away.
And did you have any way to keep him from walking away from whatever window this was he was behind?
No.
So Mr. Rogers was behind the window, and you weren't able to physically touch him, and he wasn't able to physically touch you.
Right, it was a solid wall with a window.
And so he wanted to know what his charges were, or he was leaving. What did you tell him?
I said homicide, second-degree murder.
And when you told him what the charges were, did he then agree to talk to you?
No, he did not.
What did he do?
He briefly said, well, in the state of Missouri, that's 15 to 20 years, and I'm okay with that. And I immediately tried to talk over him and say, let's talk about this, but he left.
And when somebody says something that sounds like an admission to a crime, is there something that you might want to do? Something official?
Yes, there is.
What is that?
When someone starts to admit to a crime, depending on the situation, whether they're within custody, as they are clearly in a formal holding facility, them being in custody, it's incumbent upon us to read them their Miranda warnings.
And Mr. Rogers didn't stick around for any of the formalities?
No, he did not.
And you weren't able to get him to come back and talk to you?
No.
We heard earlier that former Detective Lusk went down to the Collier jail to recover hair samples and a buccal swab from Mr. Rogers. Were you able to recover hair samples from him up in Missouri?
No, we weren't.
Did you make an attempt to recover those samples up there?
In the state of Illinois, yes, in Bond County, but not Missouri.
And how is it that he was in Illinois?
After being in St. Charles, Missouri, in the September 10th, I think, it was in the month of September of 2015. Eventually, in October, he was located in Bond County, Illinois, at another federal facility. So we obtained a warrant from a local judge to obtain those hair samples.
Okay. And the warrant that you obtained, was that from a federal judge or a state judge?
I recollect it being a state judge.
And so you went to the federal facility to get those hair pluckings?
Yes.
And what happened when you went to the federal facility with the state search warrant to get the hair pluckings?
At this particular facility, it was an open floor plan. So as we were finally allowed into a specific group area where there were some people, whether they were guards or actual inmates, people were kind of freely walking around. And when Mr. Rogers walked out towards us, he immediately threw his hands up and started yelling, "I'm not talking to these guys, I'm not talking to you." And we tried to explain why we were there.
And so you tried to explain that you were there to get the hair pluckings?
Yes,
Did you get to give him that explanation?
sort of. He started to walk away as there was one of the employees there, one of the actual guards, and we said to that guard, "We have a warrant here to get these hair pluckings," and they declined to facilitate that for us, so we had to leave.
And so that's why is that why the hair pluckings weren't obtained until 2016 here in Lee County?
Yes,
Or down in Collier County?
Collier County, correct.
May I have a moment, please, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
And can I ask Madam Clerk's assistance what State's Exhibit number 57?
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been, sorry. I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 57. And I'll first ask you, before I do that, during your contact with Mr. Wright, did you also have an opportunity to serve a body search or assist local authorities with serving a body search warrant on Mr. Wright?
Yes,
And were you able to obtain a buccal swab from Mr. Wright?
yes, it was.
And can you, for the record, identify Exhibit number 57?
You want me to read what it says on top, or just tell you what it is?
Tell me what it is.
These are buccal swabs from Curtis Wainwright.
And did you have an opportunity to obtain those buccal swabs?
I did it.
You didn't?
I did.
Oh, you
I
did.
did it. I'm the one that collected it specifically.
Okay. Moment of fear. And how did you obtain the buccal swab from Mr. Wright?
He was currently at the Jefferson County Jail in Hillsborough, Missouri, and I went in there. I read him the warrant and gloved up with sterile gloves and opened up the buccal swab packaging and collected it from his mouth.
And is that packaging sterile packaging?
Yes, it is.
And after you collected the buccal swab from his mouth, what did you do with the swabs?
I put them in more sterile packaging, which eventually made its way into here.
And can you explain to the jury, just briefly, how it is that you obtained this buccal swab? What did you do to obtain it?
I asked him to open up his mouth, and then in between the side of his mouth and his jawline, just rubbed the cotton buccal swabs along the side.
Okay, and the buccal swabs are within Exhibit number 57?
Yes,
This time the state would admit what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 57, and the evidence is State's 57.
No objection.
Show it admitted.
Okay, if I could please ask for Madam Clerk's assistance with the following exhibits. State 77. States 75. States 80. And States 91. 75, 77, 80, and 91. At this time, the state would admit the following records of self-authenticating business records. Starting first with State's Exhibit number 91. The phone number, the AT&T records of phone number 314-677-7311, the phone number for Angie Wright. State's Exhibit Number 80 for phone number 314-239-0173 as a self-authenticating business record from AT&T for the phone number belonging to Mark Sievers. That's State's Exhibit 80. State's Exhibit Number 77, the certified business records from AT&T for phone number 573-864-1179, the phone number for Jimmy Rogers. And finally, State's Exhibit Number 75 for the phone number 314-996-9581, the phone number of Curtis Wayne Wright.
Your Honor, with respects to Exhibits 77, 75, 80, and 91, defense renews all previously made objections to the business records.
Previous objections were noted for the record, overruled. Will show all 4 exhibits admitted.
Your Honor, we tender the witness.
Defense.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So Detective Lebid, you have been the supervisor for this investigation since its inception, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And as the supervisor of the investigation, what were your duties?
Personnel assignment, kind of monitoring updates, making sure all legal processes are being completed, neighborhood canvases, making sure our crime scenes maintained, and making sure that any kind of analytical work that can be done has been assigned. Just multiple tasks and organization of it kind of at the end of the day, reflecting on what we did and making a plan for the next day.
Okay. Mr. Hunter briefly spoke to you about the first time you went to Missouri and you spoke to Curtis Wainwright. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And was that date July 12th, 2015?
that sounds correct.
And in fact, did you speak to him twice on that day?
We took a bathroom break, so yes, you could count it as 2 different times.
Okay. And they were approximately 2 hours apart?
That sounds correct.
All right. Do you recall Mr. Wright telling you that he had stayed in bed all weekend that weekend?
Yes, that sounds correct.
And you expressed a little disbelief at that statement, is that correct?
God bless you. I did. I told
Okay.
him that I thought he was lying.
And so you just cut right to the chase.
We built up to it a little bit, as you can tell in the transcripts, but eventually we discussed that he was being untruthful.
Okay. And at that time, you had already had some pretty credible information supporting the notion that he had, in fact, left Missouri and traveled down to Lee County, Florida, correct?
Yes,
Okay. The first interview, would you say that was rather kind of a short interview?
are we speaking about all of the interviews that were done with Mr. Wright on July 12th?
Just, yeah, the first interview, the interview on July 12th, would you agree with me, is divided up into 2 different sections. And by 2 different sections, I mean I have 2 sets of transcripts, one starting at 8:49, and another, beginning about 2 hours after that. Do you recall that?
Yes, if you look at the end of the end time on the first transcript, you'll see that it shows a short break before the start time of the next section.
Okay. And So, 1048. You had a bit more of an in-depth conversation with Mr. Wright, is that correct?
After I got his baseline statement about him explaining where he was and who he is, and after some rapport building, yes, I became more narrowed in my focus.
And that was the first time that you had confronted him about the possibility of a failing marriage between Mr. and Dr. Sievers, correct?
That's one of the themes I went over.
Okay. And the other was you had a theory that this was something that was done for life insurance, is that correct?
That's one of the themes.
Okay. And I want to explore that. So on June 12th, 2015, you already had an idea that this was something that was done for life insurance, is that correct?
I think you mean July 12th?
Yes, July 12th of 2015.
That's one of the things that we were looking at.
Well, let's narrow in on that. What evidence or what data did you have at that time that supported that this was something that was done for life insurance?
I don't recall having any kind of data in hand. I knew that there was life insurance, but at this time, in speaking with Mr. Wright, it was one of the things that I used as a theme. And when I say theme, to explain it better, when I'm trying to help Mr. Wright look at all the possibilities in front of him, I went over different themes, and that was one of them, meaning different reasons why things happen, which is why I refer to as a theme.
Okay. And interestingly, on July 12th of 2015, do you recall asking him, would you be willing to take a lie detector test?
I think I said that time, absolutely.
Okay. And did you say that because at that time you believed that he was looking you right square in the eye line?
Objection withdrawn.
I believed he was lying to me, yes.
Okay. Now, the next time you spoke with Mr. Wright, at least the next time we have documented, would be August 27th of 2015. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And where was that interview?
It was also back at Jefferson County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. And do you recall that interview being even more focused than your July 12th, 2015 interview?
Yes, because at that time we actually had a warrant for his arrest.
Okay. And do you recall at that time advancing a theory that Jimmy was going to be paid $10,000?
I don't recall saying a sum of money.
Okay, you don't recall that with any specificity?
No.
Do you think if I showed you the statement, would that refresh your recollection?
Yes, please.
Okay, Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, sir, page.
5073, State's Discovery. And Your Honor, for the record, I'm showing the witness what's been marked as 5073 of the State's Discovery. So if you just take a look at that highlighted portion.
May I just bring it over so I, here we go. Thanks. Can you say your question again, please?
Do you recall advancing a theory that this was done and Jimmy was going to be paid $10,000?
Yes.
Okay. Can I have that back?
Yes, sir. You're welcome.
And further, do you recall in this interview, again, advancing a theory that Mr. and Dr. Teresa were having marital issues?
This is one of other themes, absolutely.
And do you recall if Curtis agreed with that or disagreed with that?
I can't remember if it was that specific day that he agreed with that or not, but I know at some point he did agree with that.
Okay, but you recall on that date that he did not agree with that?
Can you say that one more time, please?
Do you recall that on that specific date that he did not agree with that statement?
I don't recall exactly or not because of the volume of conversations that we had.
Okay. Again, would it help refresh your recollection if I showed you the statement?
Yes, please.
This time it's 5084 States Discovery. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as 5084 of the States Discovery. Want to just grab that for me? Highlighted portion. Did you have a chance to look at it?
I did.
Oh, and did Mr. Wright agree with you that Mr. and Dr. Sievers were having marital issues?
He said in the transcript, Mark never said anything to him about them having problems,
Okay.
to paraphrase.
And again, you said you were present during the proffer agreement with Mr. Wright, is that correct?
Yes.
And you recall in the proffer agreement, Mr. Wright saying, I was there, but I never went in the house when the actual murder occurred.
I do recall that.
Do you believe that that was a truthful statement?
No.
Okay. What evidence did you have to support that Mr. Wright did or did not actually go in the house at that time?
There was no direct piece of physical evidence that stood out in my mind that clearly articulated who went inside.
Okay. Did you have, at that time, any articulable evidence as to whether one or two hammers were used in the murder?
Not that I was aware of, no.
Okay. Mr. Hunter asked you about Angela Wright. You said there was no evidence to show that Angela Wright went to Florida. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you said you could affirmatively rule out Angela Wright as a participant in the murder, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does someone have to be physically present, though, to be charged in a crime?
No.
Okay. So if her job in this was to drive around Curtis's cell phone to make it look like he was actually in Missouri,
Objection calls for speculation.
Finish the question first.
if her job in this was to drive around his cell phone to make it look like he was in Missouri, she would be part of a conspiracy, wouldn't she?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
If Ms. Wright helped in the planning, she could be charged, correct?
Absolutely.
If she helped Mr. Wright avoid detection, she could be charged for this, correct?
Absolutely.
If she assisted Mr. Wright in any way, she could be charged just as he is charged, correct?
Objection calls for speculation and a legal conclusion.
Sustained.
So, sir, was it still necessary that Ms. Wright had to travel down to Florida to commit this crime?
Objection to the form of the question assumes facts not evidence.
Sustained.
You talked about some phone records, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall Mr. Wright having a prepaid phone or an anonymous phone? Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you recall the first phone call Mr. Wright made after the murder?
No.
Detective, would you agree with me that that Mr. Wright had, over the course of this investigation, given you several untruthful statements?
Yes.
Okay. And would you further agree with me that you were present for the proffer agreement, you were present for the sworn statement, and you were present for and conducted all of his previous interviews? Is that correct?
Yes.
So is it fair to say, out of everyone in the investigation, you personally had the most face-to-face contact with Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Okay. So you have firsthand then, you've borne witness to his dishonesty, correct?
Correct.
And you know that part of his sworn statement agreement, part of that agreement was he has to provide a polygraph upon demand. Is that correct?
That sounds right. There was a lot of details on it.
Was a polygraph ever administered to Mr. Wright in this case?
No.
And, sir, I kind of want to separate out your role as a supervisor from your more hands-on, the more hands-on things you did. For the hands-on things, you started out, you went to Illinois, is that correct?
We flew into Missouri and then traveled to Illinois, correct? Yes.
Okay. And so you spent 12 days in Illinois and Missouri, is that correct? Between, what would you say, July 11th?
I think we went up the 10th.
Okay.
And I returned, I think, the 13th.
Okay,
That sounds right.
sounds right. So you went up, you interviewed Curtis then, you did some canvassing, then you personally had your feet on the ground doing the work, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
When we did the canvas, it was Detective Downs and me together.
Okay. You then go back to Lee County, Florida. In August, you then travel back to Missouri, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then while in Missouri, you attempt to speak with Mr. Rogers, is that correct?
Yes.
You actually speak with Mr. Wright, is that correct?
Yes.
Both of these individuals are put under arrest, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And at that point, you then travel back to Lee County, Florida, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The next time you have, we'll call it hands-on participation, would be during the proffer agreement, is that correct?
That sounds right.
Okay. And then the time that you have hands-on participation after that would be the sworn statement, is that correct?
Just to clarify, when you say hands-on, do you mean when we actually go to speak with people?
Yes.
Because I left something out then. In September, we went up to St. Charles to try and speak with Rogers in
Okay.
September. And then we tried to speak with him and do the body hair search warrant in October.
Okay.
And then later on, I want to say it was possibly December or January is when we did the proffer with
Okay.
Mr. Wright. So I just wanted to clear up the timeline.
Okay, no, thank you, thank you. So you did we did the proffer in January, correct?
That sounds right.
And then in February, we did the sworn statement, February 16th.
Correct.
And sir, did you have any further involvement in this particular case?
A little bit with some of the witnesses.
Okay, so like doing interviews, getting sworn statements from witnesses, talking to neighbors, things like that?
Yes.
Okay. But is it fair to say that the Lee County Sheriff's Office has a pretty good crime scene investigation section, and you tend to leave more of the technical gathering to those people?
Evidence collection is primarily done by the Lee County Sheriff's Office crime scene personnel. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I don't have anything else.
State.
So during the investigation, did you and Downs have an opportunity to communicate with the crime scene folks about what was going on in the investigation back at the house?
Yes.
At any point, did you become aware of a document that was stuck in a shredder at the house?
Yes.
Some kind of insurance document?
Yes.
And was that prior to your initial discussion or after your initial discussion with Mr. Wright?
I don't remember.
And also, did you have, we talked earlier about Taylor Showmaker's discussions with Lieutenant Downs, or then Detective Downs. Was your 27th, August 27th interview with Mr. Wright, where you mentioned the $10,000, was that before or after Downs's discussion with Taylor Showmaker?
That would be after.
And so the information you had with you when you went into that August 27th interview may have included information you received from Taylor Showmaker?
Yes.
When you met with Mr. Wright on 7/12/15, did he have counsel?
No.
When you met with him on 8/27/15, did he have counsel?
No.
When you met with him here in Lee County in January of 2016, did he have counsel for the proffer?
Yes, he did.
Did you even have the ability to have contact with Mr. Wright at that proffer without his lawyer there?
No.
Other than calling him out in the beginning part of his proffer when he lied to us, did you have any other discussions with Mr. Wright without his lawyer there?
No.
Did you at any point tell Mr. Wright what to say to us during that proffer?
The truth.
Then after the plea agreement was reached, we later on did the sworn statement with Mr. Wright. Did you have any contact with Mr. Wright then without his counsel present?
No.
And did you then tell Mr. Wright what to say to us?
Same thing. Tell the truth.
During your initial discussion with Mr. Wright on 7/12, did you need a lie detector machine to tell he was lying to you?
No.
And on 8/27, you need a lie detector machine to tell him?
Objection, Your Honor, may we approach?
Sure.
So on 8/27, when Mr. Wright lied to you, did you need a lie detector to tell that he was lying?
No.
Then during our proffer, when Mr. Wright sat across the table from you and lied in the beginning part of that proffer, did you need a lie detector to tell you he was lying to you then?
No, I did not.
And you're not some kind of human lie detector, right?
No, I'm not.
Let's talk about themes. In detective school, I don't know if there is a such thing, but during your training, do you receive training in how to do police interviews?
Yes.
If a person is believed to have been involved in a crime, are there any specific methods that you employ to see if they will admit to being involved at all?
Yes.
What are some of those methods?
There's a couple things that we focus on, one being timeline, knowing about what was going on in their life right before, during the crime, and after. And see how logical it is and if it matches up to other people's recollection of events that are involved in the case around the peripheral. On top of that, depending on what I know about them from building rapport, possibly a background investigation on them before I'm able to go into the interview room, I will try and ask them questions that would lead to admitting something or denying something. Sometimes a strong denial is more beneficial than an admission, depending on what's going on in an investigation.
So, for example, when Mr. Rogers denied being in Florida and he's on video, was that something important for your investigation?
Very important.
And during your part of your training, did you, prior to that denial, did you tell Mr. Rogers that he was on video in Florida?
Never got the opportunity.
When Mr. Wright lies to you in Missouri, was the fact that he was on video an important thing that you knew?
Yes.
Now, when you talk about themes, you use the word themes when you were talking about your interviews. Can you explain to the jury what a theme is? What do you mean when you use that word?
Based on who I'm speaking to and knowing about their background and what, if I've been able to listen to them and hear them, what they've told me so far in an interview, I find out kind of what they believe in and what I think would affect them personally. Some people it's their family. Some people it's about infidelity. Sometimes it's about money. And when I have a belief and the preliminary evidence suggests that this person is involved, I will use themes such as in this case when I mentioned money because I knew that Curtis Wainwright was kind of destitute, that his in-laws were purchasing groceries for him on a weekend. So bringing up money I thought would be a useful idea to see how it would affect his further statements. And that's what I mean by themes. Finding something that I think is relatable to the person I'm speaking to try and bring them in to focus more with me.
And did you force or in any way coerce Mr. Wright to lie to you?
No.
Did you want him to lie to you?
No.
On 8/27, same thing. Did you force or coerce him in any way to lie to you?
No.
So despite the fact that you gave him these themes, he still lied to you?
Yes.
And then were you privy to any of the discussions between Mr. Wright and his lawyers, either prior to or after his proffer in January of 2016?
No.
And were you privy to any of the discussions between Mr. Wright and his lawyers prior to or after his sworn statement in 2016?
No.
Thank you.
Defense.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can I have Exhibit 18, please?
Sorry,
That's okay, Michelle.
it's in here somewhere. Good job. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sir, I'm handing you what's been previously admitted as Exhibit 18. Do you recognize that document?
Vaguely, yes.
Okay. And do you recall Mr. Hunter referencing a shredded insurance policy?
Yes.
Objection. Counsel's misstating the question. The word was document.
Overruled.
Do you recall Mr. Hunter referencing a shredded document?
Yes.
Okay. And, sir, would you agree with me that that particular document that's in evidence is from the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company?
Yes.
Okay. Beyond that, can you tell me if that was a life insurance policy?
No, not without opening it and trying to look at it.
Okay. Can you tell me if it was homeowner's insurance?
No.
Can you tell me if it was disability?
No.
Is it fair to say that with what's there, you can't tell me what type of policy it is? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. You were able, you being the Lee County Sheriff's Office, to ascertain that life insurance proceeds were payable from one of 5 different companies. Do you recall that?
That sounds correct.
Okay. Do you recall State Farm being one of the policies?
I can't.
Beyond the scope of redirect.
Overruled.
Do you recall if State Farm was one of the policies?
I don't.
How about Ohio Life? Do you recall?
That sounds correct.
What about Prudential?
Possibly, yes.
Jackson?
I don't remember.
What about the Hartford?
It sounds correct.
Okay. Would you agree with me, however, that Mr. Sievers is neither a beneficiary or insured in any policy from MetLife?
Objections beyond the scope of redirect.
Can answer if he knows. Overruled.
Say it again, please.
Are you aware if Mr. Mark Sievers is the beneficiary or insured for any life insurance policy from MetLife?
I'm not aware.
Thank you. Mr. Hunter asked you if you knew Mr. Wright was lying because you had actually seen evidence that directly contradicted his statement, correct?
Say that again, please.
When Mr. Hunter asked you how you knew that Mr. Wright was lying, you said you had actual evidence directly contradicting his statements. You recall that?
In reference to August interview, yes.
So you were actually able to watch the Walmart video and clearly identify Mr. Wright as the person in that video. Is that correct?
That information was relayed to us. I didn't directly obtain the video or
Okay.
watch it in person there.
But you knew of its existence. You knew that there was geolocation data. Is that correct?
Are we referring to the video at Walmart right now?
The video data, the cell phone records, the Garmin. You had knowledge of all of those different things. Is that correct?
Yes, as they unfolded, yes.
Okay. given the evidence as you understand it, do you know if there is any forensic evidence to show if one or two hammers were used in the attack?
Based on my understanding of the evidence, no.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
State,
Nothing further.
is this witness to be released or retained?
He's released by the state. Retained, Your Honor.
You're subject to recall. We'll let you know if you're needed again. Thank you, sir.
Yes, Your Honor.
This is one of those days that we're going to stop a little bit early. It's 4:30, so we're close to 5. I'm going to ask that you not talk about the case among yourselves with anybody else or look up any of the people or places involved, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:30. Please be seated. Anything further till tomorrow morning from the state?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
Defense?
Nothing from defense, Your Honor.
See everybody tomorrow morning at 8:30.